in an unknown domain of space.
Any sign of life?
They unleashed a power that has sought vengeance for 1,000 years.
Hello there, dear cinephiles. We are here today to talk a movie of distinction. Yes, indeed, one that is in the top 100 list of a very popular website. A cinema creation based on classic literature. We are, of course, talking Dracula 3000, and yes, this is a movie that I own on Blu-ray. Okay, we are talking Dracula 3000, and yes, this is in a top 100 list on IMDb. IMDb's worst movies of all time, top 100. So, a 2004 movie directed by Daryl James Root. And this one stars Casper Van Dien, Erika, Eleniak, Tiny Lister, and Coolio. And is a very loose kind of, well, not even an adaptation really, it just has kind of the Dracula name and a couple of kind of name checks here and there. But yes, it's a science fiction horror film based on Dracula. So, what is the story? So it focuses on this crew of a kind of salvage ship as they detect this this kind of large kind of space station that is seemingly drifting uninhabited. They dock there, and we find that this is completely uninhabited initially, only a video file from its former captain, played by Udo Kier, who of course was in Blade, along with other kind of cult movies here and there. But we learn this movie is home to Dracula, who is from the planet Transylvania. So this kind of causes a problem, of course, for our team, who decide that they're going to try and kill Dracula, but he has other plans. He wants to turn them into bloodthirsty vampires. What'll happen? You'll just have to watch Dracula 3000 and find out. So, is this one of the worst movies ever made, according to IMDb? Is there anything that I can say that works in this movie's favour? Okay, if you watch this channel, you know we can look a lot of B movies here. So I'm not plenty familiar with lots of kind of B movies, and there are some kind of quite fun cast members here. I actually quite like Erika Eleniak here. Yes, she's kind of cast here because she has sex appeal, but I still kind of quite liked her character. And yes, she is obviously kind of quite sexy here. I actually found Casper Van Dien as well to be, somewhat of a fun character, although he doesn't have a huge amount of screen time, to be honest with you. So this is a kind of one of those movies which has some kind of funny moments in it, some of which are not meant to be funny. They're kind of funny unintentionally, but nonetheless there is some amusing moments kind of here and there. And there's a couple of kind of like okay-ish, low budget kind of sequences, actions. I don't even want to call them action sequences really, but light action sequences or kind of light kind of effects. Like, for example, when Coolio, spoiler alert, gets turned into a vampire, I actually thought his kind of vampire makeup actually looked okay here. I actually thought that kind of the work they did with his prosthetic fangs and things like that looked okay. And it's a short movie, it goes at a fair old pace. You might feel like I am scraping the barrel with this one, and it is true, I am scraping the barrel because this isn't a good movie. I'm not going to pretend it is. Do I think it's the worst 100 movies of all time? No, I do not. I've probably reviewed 100 movies worse than this one on this very channel, but it is not a good movie. Let me give you some context about why I would say that. So it's very cheap. I mean, we're meant to believe this is obviously taking place on a starship. The kind of the sets here are clearly just like a factory. When we first see Coolio, it looks like he's in a room with cardboard walls that have got kind of bubble, the bubble popping kind of plastic on it and things like that. Incredibly kind of crappy, either cheap sets or you know, locations which are meant to kind of look industrial, and therefore we are meant to believe that there's kind of obviously a spaceship, albeit it's got kind of stone floors and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you know, it doesn't look particularly kind of expensive. The kind of the props here, the guns that they're using, just kind of look like, you know, cheap kind of like prop guns, things like that. The kind of the costuming is all very cheesy. Erika Eleniak, as I say, just dressed kind of sexy, really for just for the viewing pleasure of the male gaze there, to be quite honest with you. Not at all practical, and there are some elements that do kind of drag. I mentioned I quite like the makeup effects on when Coolio becomes a vampire, but man, his character, great. I mean, it's this whole thing where, you know, he's playing, you know, the typical kind of stoner kind of, you know, frequent kind of guy who's always smoking weed and all that. Yeah, it's really old, but like, I feel they've just kind of like let him rip and kind of just kind of improvise his kind of weird kind of jokey lines, and it just goes on and on and on forever. I mean, when they have these kind of different kind of relationships, and you just feel like they've just kind of come up with them there on the spot, like the relationship between Coolio and kind of Tiny Lister and Erika Eleniak's character. It feels very kind of like just kind of made up on the kind of the spot here. The characters are very broad. We have this kind of guy who's in a kind of a wheelchair, and you know, he's just kind of like the worst actor. He's the only kind of one I didn't recognise, to be honest with you, and his kind of acting is pretty terrible. But let's talk about Dracula himself. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, it's a little embarrassing, to be honest with you. The Dracula they've gone for here is like classic kind of like Monster Squad style Dracula with a big kind of pop collar and, you know, kind of medieval clothing. We only believe he's from a different kind of planet. You know, it's very silly. This movie is very silly. It's not obviously meant to be a film that's taken seriously, but even I think even if you can, even on a schlocky level, it kind of fails, unfortunately, to become really kind of fun. This movie is silly, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's fun. It just ends up being a little bit groan-worthy at times. The guy who plays Dracula as well, despite the fact that I think his costuming department here could do a little work. He's so uncharismatic as the kind of as Dracula, and you know, he just looks like someone's dad. It's pretty bad, to be honest. So yes, this is a bad movie. It's not an interesting plot. It's very kind of silly. The CGI is terrible, but there are things here that I think, you know, you could just kind of like at least enjoy it for some schlocky fun to a point. And I still kind of quite like seeing some of these B-movie actors kind of on screen and kind of interacting and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say necessarily it's like one of the worst films I've ever seen, but it is bad. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.